woman who lived under a bridge. One night, as I was about to hand her the container of food, the old woman suddenly grabbed my wrist and whispered, "You have been the only person in this city who has treated me with true kindness. Whatever you do, do not go back to your apartment tonight. Sleep in a nearby hotel. Tomorrow, I will explain why, and I have something to show you." Her sudden change left me completely stunned. That night, the Chicago air was unusually frigid, as if carrying grim news that had yet to arrive. The protagonist, Emily, had just finished scrubbing the last stack of plates in the kitchen of the diner where she worked. Her hands, wrinkled from being in soapy water for so long, ached and felt stiff. For the last 3 months, a persistent smell of grease and old coffee had clung to her body. The diner's owner, a short-tempered middle-aged man, yelled at her to hurry up and get out so he could lock up. Emily nodded silently, adjusted her old, faded scarf, and picked up a black plastic bag from a corner of the kitchen. It was her dinner: cold mac and cheese that was still edible, and some leftover pot roast that hadn't sold that day. To others, it might be trash, but to Emily, it was sustenance. Stepping out the back door of the diner, she found herself in a narrow, dark, and grimy alley. She zipped up her thin jacket, trying to shield herself from the fierce night wind. After divorcing her ex-husband, Mark, her life had taken a 180-degree turn. She used to live in a luxurious penthouse with cold marble floors, but now she had to be grateful for a damp, leaky basement apartment. Her footsteps echoed rhythmically, breaking the silence of the alley. The sound of rats scurrying through the sewers seemed to accompany her walk. Emily didn't head straight home. Before she could rest her exhausted body, there was a place she visited every night. Her steps led her toward the imposing Wabash Avenue Bridge, which spanned the city, a place where, behind the ostentatious streetlights, the darker side of life was hidden. Under that bridge, among the solid concrete pillars and piles of old cardboard, people knew her as Annie. No one knew where she came from or who her family was. Annie was simply known as a quiet old woman who often sat in silence, lost in thought as she stared at the murky waters of the river. Emily first met her when she was thrown out of Mark's home. Back then, Emily was sitting by the riverbank crying, and Annie, without a word, offered her half of a stale bread roll. From that day on, Emily promised herself that as long as she had something to eat, Annie wouldn't go hungry either. A strange bond formed between two abandoned and forgotten souls in a cruel world. Emily descended the slippery slope toward the underside of the bridge. She saw a thin figure huddled on a pile of newspapers, hugging her knees to fight the cold. Emily managed a bitter smile. Seeing that image always squeezed her heart. She quickened her pace and greeted her in a soft voice so as not to startle her. Annie turned her head. Her face, full of wrinkles, looked exhausted, but her gaze always held a strange serenity. Without hesitation, Emily sat down beside her. Despite the smell of dampness and mold, she opened the plastic bag she had brought. The aroma of the still warm macaroni and a bit of beef stew from the diner spread out, slightly masking the unpleasant smell of the river. Emily divided the food into 2 portions on a piece of wax paper, one for herself and the larger portion for Annie. As they ate, Emily began to talk as usual. For her, who had no one in the world to lean on, Annie was the only person she could confide in. Her parents had passed away long ago, and her friends had drifted away after she married the possessive Mark, disappearing completely when she became poor. Emily told her about her swollen legs from standing for 10 hours without a break, about a customer who had screamed at her for being slow to clean a table, and about the shadows of the past that still haunted her. She relived the pain of when Mark threw her suitcases onto the street, yelling that she was an embarrassment. Mark had demanded a divorce simply because Emily refused to parade herself in a revealing dress at one of his business galas. To Mark, his wife was merely an accessory to show off, and Emily was treated as an outdated and unattractive ornament. Emily swallowed a mouthful of food with difficulty as she remembered the face of the woman who now took her place, Tiffany. Tiffany was everything Mark desired. Beautiful, sophisticated, outgoing, and from the same social circle. Tiffany used to deliberately come to the diner where Emily worked to show off her new designer handbag or to toss a few cents at her as a tip with a look of contempt. With a trembling voice, Emily confessed all this to Annie. She felt it was unfair. During their 5-year marriage, she had strived to be a submissive and devoted wife. She served Mark sincerely, cooked his favorite dishes, and kept the house spotless. But none of that meant anything to Mark compared to worldly wealth and vanity. Emily felt like trash thrown away after being wrung dry. Annie listened intently. She stared at Emily's face, faintly lit by the streetlights from the bridge above. Usually, Annie would just nod or mumble something softly, but tonight her gaze was different. A spark of restrained anger and something sharp glinted in her eyes. She seemed to be analyzing every word that came from Emily's mouth. Too absorbed in her own sorrow, Emily didn't notice. After finishing their meal, Emily put the leftover paper back into the plastic bag. She was only thinking of getting back to her basement, a mile from the bridge. Her body was screaming for rest, and the next day she had to wake up at dawn to get ready for work. Emily stood up, brushing the dust from her long skirt. As she was about to say goodbye and turn away, Annie's wrinkled hand grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Emily was startled. Turning back, she saw Annie standing before her. Her usual stooped posture was gone. She now stood straight and firm. Her eyes, normally clouded, now shone with an authority and sharpness that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. Emily, thinking the old woman was sick or had lost her mind, felt confused and a little scared. She tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. Annie brought her face close to Emily's, and for the first time, Emily didn't smell garbage, but a very faint yet elegant scent of lilies emanating from the old woman's tattered clothes. Annie whispered in a clear, firm, and cold voice, completely different from her usual raspy tone. She told her that Emily was the only person with a conscience in this rotten city, and what she said next made Emily's heart stop for a moment. Annie strictly forbade her from going home that night. It wasn't a suggestion, but an absolute command. Emily tried to argue that she needed to rest and had no money to go anywhere else, but Annie cut her off quickly. She rummaged through her ragged clothes and pulled out a gleaming gold key card. It was a hotel room key. Emily recognized the logo on the card. It was from the 5-star hotel that stood right next to the bridge where they were. Emily looked back and forth between the card and Annie's face in disbelief. How could a homeless woman have a key to a room in the most luxurious hotel in the city? A whirlwind of questions flooded her mind. Had she stolen it? Was this a trap? As if she could read her thoughts, Annie placed the card in Emily's palm and closed her fingers over it. She told her it wasn't stolen and that there was no time to explain everything now. Annie claimed that if she insisted on going home, her life would be in grave danger. Her words were serious, not a joke. Emily felt the sincerity in Annie's tone, along with a real threat. The aura of strong leadership suddenly emanating from the old woman made Emily feel small and submissive. Annie gently pushed Emily by the back toward the exit from under the bridge, in the direction of the hotel. Before she walked away, Annie delivered her last message of the night. She promised they would meet in the hotel room the next morning to explain everything and to show her something that would change her life forever. Emily nodded stiffly and, stumbling, left the underside of the bridge, leaving Annie behind, who sat back down in the darkness, watching her go like a faithful guardian of the night. With her heart pounding and 1,000 questions in her head, Emily crossed the street toward the imposing building she had until now only admired from a distance. Emily's feet felt heavy as she entered the lobby of the 5-star hotel. Her thin sneakers squeaked softly on the gleaming marble floor, in a sad contrast to the opulence surrounding her. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a dazzling golden light. The people coming and going wore expensive suits and beautiful dresses, exuding intoxicating scents of luxury perfumes. Emily felt infinitely small and dirty. Her worn-out jacket and scarf attracted unwanted stares. Several guests looked at her with disgust, as if she were a germ lost in a royal palace. A security guard at the main entrance took a step toward her, intending to throw her out, but he stopped when he saw the gold card Emily was clutching in her right hand. With her head bowed, Emily approached the reception desk made of elegant black granite. Her heart was pounding. She feared that the card Annie had given her was fake or expired, and that she would be humiliated and dragged out. A beautiful receptionist with a practiced smile greeted her with a look of bewilderment. Emily couldn't say anything. She simply placed the gold access card on the counter. The receptionist's reaction was completely unexpected. Upon seeing the card, her eyes widened in surprise, and her attitude instantly changed to one of extreme courtesy, even trembling slightly. She gave a deep bow as if Emily were a queen in disguise. Without the usual procedures of asking for identification or a deposit, the receptionist immediately called the manager, who personally escorted Emily to a VIP elevator. Inside the glass-walled elevator, Emily saw her own reflection. A gaunt face, dark circles under her eyes, a skeletal body. She wondered, what power does Annie have that a single card gets me treated like royalty? The manager accompanying her smiled politely without saying much, leading her to a luxurious suite on the top floor. When the door opened, Emily's jaw dropped. The room was larger than her entire basement apartment. There was a living room with soft leather sofas, a huge bed with white silk sheets, and a gigantic picture window offering a nighttime view of the entire city from above. Emily was left alone in luxurious silence. She didn't dare touch anything, afraid of soiling the expensive furniture with her rough hands. Finally, exhaustion overcame her fear. Emily took off her jacket and washed her face in the bathroom sink, whose faucets were made of gold. The warm water on her face felt refreshing. Exhaustion overcame her fear. Emily sank to her knees beside the enormous bed, the plush carpet a strange comfort. Clasping her hands together, she bowed her head and prayed. In the midst of this strange luxury, only prayer could keep her grounded. Tears streamed down her face as she poured out all her confusion and fear to God, praying for protection and guidance, pouring out all her confusion and fear before God. She prayed fervently for protection and guidance in the face of the strange events that had happened to her that night. After praying, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, looking through the large, uncurtained window. There, the beautiful city lights twinkled, but her gaze was fixed on a dark spot across the bridge, the poor neighborhood where her basement was located. The digital clock next to the bed read 2 a.m., just as she was about to close her eyes. Suddenly, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The sound grew closer and more numerous. Emily got out of bed and approached the window. In the distance, her heart stopped as she saw red flames leaping into the sky from the location of her neighborhood. The fire, in a frantic dance, devoured the semi-permanent wood and plywood buildings in an instant. Emily pressed her palms against the cold glass of the window. Her eyes widened in horror. She recognized the location of the fire. It was the row where her basement was. More specifically, the fire seemed to have originated in her room and spread to the neighboring buildings. Emily's body trembled violently. If she had gone home tonight as usual, she would be trapped inside right now, burned alive in her sleep. Annie's words echoed in her ears again, the firm warning not to go home because her life was in danger. They weren't the ramblings of a senile old woman. Annie knew something was going to happen. Emily felt nauseous, imagining what her fate would have been if she hadn't obeyed the old woman's command. Down on the streets near the fire trucks began to arrive, spraying water on the fierce flames, but Emily's attention was drawn to a black luxury sedan. It was parked in a rather dark spot, a little away from the crowd. It was in a visible location, even from the height of the hotel. Emily squinted, trying to focus. She knew that car very well. It was her ex-husband Mark's car. Emily used to wash it often. She saw a man standing next to the car, smoking a cigarette and calmly watching the fire. Although the distance was great, Emily could perceive the satisfaction in the man's posture. It was Mark. Emily was 100% sure. There was no reason for Mark to be in that poor neighborhood at 2 inches the morning unless he had a specific purpose. In an instant, the pieces of the puzzle clicked together horribly in Emily's mind. This fire was not an accident. It was arson. Mark had set her home on fire to kill her. Her ex-husband wanted her dead. Emily shed tears without realizing it, not from sadness, but from utter terror and a sense of betrayal. She knew Mark hated her, but she never imagined he would go as far as to commit murder. Perhaps Mark thought Emily would continue to demand the division of assets he was delaying, or perhaps Tiffany felt threatened by Emily living in the same city. Whatever the reason, Mark had decided to eliminate Emily from this world that night. Emily watched as Mark threw his cigarette butt to the ground, got into his car, and left the scene, leaving behind the still raging fire that was destroying Emily's home and those of her innocent neighbors. Emily's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the thick carpeted floor, hugging her knees. It was like witnessing her own death. Technically, to Mark and the rest of the world, the Emily who lived in that basement would be considered dead as of tonight. All her belongings, her clothes, and the photos with her memories had surely turned to ash. Her old identity as a poor, oppressed divorcee had burned along with that house. In the silent, luxurious hotel room, Emily felt death and rebirth at the same time. Fear slowly transformed into another emotion, something colder and harder. She realized she owed her life to Annie. If it weren't for that old woman, Emily would be nothing more than a charred corpse to be found the next morning. That night, Emily couldn't sleep anymore. She sat by the window until the sun rose in the east, watching the smoke rise. The morning light slowly illuminated her pale face, but now her eyes shone with a new determination. She was no longer the weak, submissive Emily who only cried under the bridge. Tonight, Mark's cruelty had forcibly stripped her of her innocence. Emily made a vow in her heart. In the name of God who saved me, I will not let the sins of Mark and Tiffany go unpunished. I will find out who Annie is and why she helped me. If God has given me a second chance at life, I will use it to seek justice for myself. A knock on the hotel room door made Emily stand up. She took a deep breath, wiped away her last tears, and walked with her back straight to open the door, ready to face her new destiny. The morning sunlight filtered through the partially open curtains of the hotel room, illuminating Emily's face, still swollen from crying all night. She hadn't slept at all after witnessing that terrible scene. Her mind was still in a whirlwind, oscillating between the relief of having survived and the horror of Mark's cruelty. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her long reverie. Emily jumped, her heart racing. She hesitated for a moment. She was afraid it was the police with bad news or perhaps a hitman from Mark who had discovered her whereabouts. But the gentle knock sounded again, followed by the polite voice of a man claiming to be from room service. Emily straightened the clothes she had been wearing since the night before and cautiously approached the door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw two employees in impeccable uniforms pushing a food cart with a silver lid. Emily opened the door slowly. The two employees gave a polite bow and entered without a word. They began to serve a lavish, multi-course breakfast on the dining table in the center of the suite. The aroma of freshly baked bread, fresh coffee, and a cheese omelet filled the room, and Emily's stomach rumbled silently, reminding her she hadn't eaten anything since the bagged rice the night before. But Emily's attention was not on the food, but on a figure who slowly entered behind the employees. A very elegant elderly woman, exuding an aura of immense authority, entered the room. She was wearing a stylish cream-colored pantsuit made of high-quality silk, with her hair, completely white, pulled back into a flawless bun with a gold pin. Around her neck, she wore a pearl necklace that shone subtly, matching the earrings that adorned her ears. She wore light makeup, which gave her a fresh and dignified appearance, without any trace of senility. Emily stood frozen, feeling strange and intimidated before this noble guest. She thought this woman must be a high-level executive or the owner of the hotel coming to check on a guest. She lowered her head, ashamed of her disheveled appearance. She tried to greet her politely, but her tongue was tied. The old woman motioned for the employees to leave. When the door closed and they were alone in the spacious room, the old woman smiled warmly. That smile was very familiar to Emily. The woman's eyes looked at her with a kind yet penetrating gaze. It was the same gaze the homeless old woman from under the bridge had. Emily's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand in astonishment. She struggled to find in the face of the elegant woman before her any trace of Annie's ragged, dirty face, and she found it. The determined jawline and a small mole near the chin were unmistakable. The woman approached and gently placed her hands on Emily's shoulders. She greeted her in her original, dignified voice, asking if she had slept well. Emily still couldn't speak. Her brain was trying to process the drastic change before her eyes. How could the homeless old woman with whom she shared scraps every night be the aristocratic lady standing before her now? Annie, seeing Emily's confusion, laughed softly and led her to sit on the sofa. She poured hot green tea into a porcelain cup and offered it to Emily. And then Annie, with the calm of someone telling a bedtime story, began to explain everything. The story she told was a shocking reality. She introduced herself as Eleanor Vance, the sole owner of Vanguard Consolidated, a massive conglomerate with interests in real estate, hotels, and mining. Upon hearing that name, Emily almost choked on her tea. Vanguard Consolidated was a legend in the business world, one of the backbones of the country's economy, often mentioned in the news. Mrs. Vance explained that for the past year, she had been deliberately disguising herself as a homeless person in various parts of the city to search for human authenticity. Having no children of her own, she felt surrounded by hypocrites, sycophants, and relatives who only coveted her inheritance. She wanted to know if there was still anyone left who would care for a poor old woman without expecting anything in return. And during her months in disguise under the bridge, the only person who consistently visited her, shared her food, and sincerely listened to her complaints was Emily, even though she herself was living in scarcity. Next, Mrs. Vance spoke about the fire the previous night. She confessed that she had a personal security team that always watched her from a distance during her disguises. That team informed her that 2 suspicious men were spraying gasoline around Emily's basement apartment in the early morning. Mrs. Vance knew it was Mark's doing. Her intelligence team had been investigating Emily's background since she started getting close to her. Mrs. Vance deliberately did not prevent the fire but made sure Emily was safe. She let the house burn so that Mark would believe his plan had succeeded. That way, Mark would relax, let his guard down, and no longer consider Emily an obstacle in his new life. "It's a wartime strategy," Mrs. Vance said with a cold tone that gave Emily chills. Emily listened, crying again. She felt immense gratitude to God for sending her a guardian angel in an unexpected form, but at the same time, she felt intimidated. She asked why someone as important as Mrs. Vance would go to the trouble of saving a poor divorcee like her. Mrs. Vance looked at her intently and then placed a thick stack of documents on the marble table in front of them. She said she didn't just want to save Emily, but also to elevate her status. Mrs. Vance said she was old and needed an heir with a heart of gold, not a wolf in sheep's clothing like her relatives. She offered Emily the chance to become her adopted granddaughter and inherit her entire fortune. There was only one main condition. Emily had to be willing to be educated to become a strong woman who would not be trampled on, and Emily had to be willing to use her new power to teach Mark and Tiffany a lesson. The offer sounded like a dream. Emily looked at the documents with trembling hands. They were legal adoption papers and a power of attorney over some of the company's assets. A momentary doubt crossed Emily's mind. She was not an evil person. She had never planned revenge. But the image of the fire devouring her home, Mark's face smiling with satisfaction next to his luxury car, and the humiliations she had suffered from Tiffany ignited a new spark in her heart. Unchecked evil only breeds more evil. Mark almost killed her, and the law might not touch him for lack of evidence. Emily realized this was the path God had opened for her. She looked deep into Mrs. Vance's eyes and saw hope and conviction in them. After a deep, decisive breath, Emily nodded. She accepted the offer. She was ready to leave the old, weak, and weeping Emily behind and be reborn as a new person who would make Mark regret it for the rest of his life. The news of the massive fire in the poor neighborhood on the outskirts of the city was the headline on the local morning television news. The cameras showed the still smoldering remains of the buildings, traces of charred lives. The reporter on the scene reported that one victim was presumed trapped in a basement, as the fire had spread too quickly in the middle of the night when residents were sound asleep. Emily's name was mentioned as one of the unaccounted-for residents, and it was presumed she had likely burned to death, as no witnesses saw her get out. In a luxurious mansion in an upscale neighborhood, Mark was enjoying his breakfast with a radiant smile he couldn't hide as he watched the news. He felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. There was no longer a poor ex-wife who could tarnish his image. There was no longer a lawsuit for the division of assets threatening his company's unstable cash flow. Beside him, Tiffany was painting her nails red and smiling cynically. She said that finally, that piece of trash had been burned up and would no longer interfere in their lives. While Mark and Tiffany celebrated their false victory, in a secret penthouse owned by Vanguard Consolidated, Emily was watching the same news on a huge television screen. She saw her old photo, a faded picture taken after her wedding, appear on the screen with the caption "Presumed Deceased." Emily's emotions were complex. She felt sadness at seeing her own death. It was as if the old Emily had truly died, but on the other hand, she felt free. Her old identity as a victim had been consumed by the flames. Now she was a blank page, ready to be rewritten. Mrs. Vance turned off the television with the remote and looked seriously at Emily. She told her that from that moment on, Emily had to forget her past. Mrs. Vance gave her a new name for her new public identity. The distant and mysterious niece and investor of Mrs. Vance, newly arrived from abroad, Director Luna. From that day, the transformation began. Mrs. Vance was not a woman of mere words. She summoned the best team of experts to the penthouse: makeup artists, renowned fashion designers, a personality coach, and even a senior business consultant. Emily, used to domestic chores like washing dishes, now had to undergo a mentally exhausting and rigorous training program. Her body received intensive care. Her skin, rough and dull from the sun and detergents, began to receive world-class spa treatments daily. Her gaunt face started to fill out and glow thanks to proper nutrition. Her teeth and smile were corrected, but the physical changes were only a small part of this transformation. The biggest challenge for Emily was changing her mindset and posture. She learned to walk with her back straight and her head held high, radiating confidence with every step. She learned to sit elegantly, to hold a wine glass, and the complex etiquette of fine dining. Her personality coach was very strict and often reprimanded her when she lowered her head or spoke in a low, hesitant voice. "The powerful do not bow their heads, Director," the coach would say firmly. "They look others in the eye because they know they are in control." Emily practiced walking hundreds of times until her feet blistered, but she didn't complain. Every time she felt tired and wanted to give up, the image of the fire burning her house would reappear, giving her the strength to get up again. Her style also changed. The old, makeshift scarves were gone. Fashion designers created a modern, elegant style, using luxurious silks and pashminas, wrapped in turban style or other sophisticated ways that highlighted her neck and diamond earrings, while still covering her body with class and distinction. Between physical care, Emily immersed herself in business classes. Mrs. Vance herself was her main mentor. Every night, they would sit in the study and analyze the financial reports of Mark's company. Emily learned to read balance sheets, understand cash flows, and acquisition strategies. At first, the numbers gave her a headache, but gradually she began to understand. She discovered that Mark's company was, in fact, on the verge of bankruptcy. Due to Tiffany's wasteful lifestyle and Mark's careless business decisions, he had massive debts to banks and various suppliers. Mark's company only looked successful on the outside. Inside, it was rotten. Mrs. Vance explained that Mark was looking for a major investor to save his sinking ship. That was the opening they would exploit. Emily had to become Director Luna, the saving angel who was actually the angel of death for Mark's business. Emily learned quickly. Her intelligence, suppressed by poverty and the pressure of her marriage, began to shine. She memorized every detail of Mark's projects, his management weaknesses, and even the small scandals that could be exploited. Emily learned to speak with a direct, sharp, and strategic business language. She trained her tone of voice to sound cold and menacing, eliminating any rustic accent or way of speaking that Mark used to ridicule. She practiced for hours in front of the mirror, speaking to her own shadow, training a gaze that could strip bare and frighten her interlocutor. 2 weeks passed, and the day to present Emily's new identity arrived. Mrs. Vance told Emily to get ready in the dressing room. Emily put on a perfectly tailored, deep black women's pantsuit that hugged her body perfectly. Her dark gold satin scarf was impeccably and elegantly wrapped. Makeup with a bold lipstick gave her a determined look. She wore oversized sunglasses from a famous brand to hide part of her eyes, adding an air of mystery. Emily stood in front of a large, full-length mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The woman in the mirror was not the Emily who washed dishes. That woman was powerful, wealthy, and looked dangerous. Mrs. Vance entered the dressing room and smiled with satisfaction at her work. She handed Emily a limited edition crocodile skin handbag. Mrs. Vance said that today was the first day of hunting. Mark's secretary had just sent a proposal requesting a meeting with a representative from Vanguard Consolidated. Mrs. Vance had already arranged for the meeting to take place the next day at a very specific location chosen by Emily herself. Emily took the bag, looked at herself one more time, and gave a faint smile. It was not the sweet smile of the old Emily, but the cold, calculating smile of Director Luna. She was ready. She was ready to face Mark, not as the abandoned wife, but as the woman who held her ex-husband's fate at her fingertips. The Queen's transformation was complete, and the beautiful drama of revenge was about to begin. The cold afternoon wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the dry leaves scattered among the tombstones. The sky, a deep gray, portended an impending storm. Mark waited impatiently near the entrance, constantly checking his expensive, shiny wristwatch. He cursed his secretary under his breath for arranging a business meeting in such a strange place. His gleaming leather shoes, now stained with mud, irritated him further, but he had no choice. His company was on the brink of collapse, debts were piling up, and he needed a capital injection as soon as possible. The mysterious investor from Vanguard Consolidated, known as Director Luna, was his last hope. She was rumored to be very eccentric and difficult to contact, so even if Director Luna wanted to meet in a cemetery, Mark had to comply with her demands for the promised hundreds of millions of dollars. A long black limousine slowly entered the cemetery, breaking the stillness of the final resting place. The car stopped exactly 10 yards from Mark. A uniformed chauffeur got out and quickly opened the back door. Mark's heart pounded. He rushed to straighten his suit and put on his best smile, the same fake smile he always used to deceive his clients. From inside the car emerged a pair of long legs in black high heels. The woman's figure stood tall, exuding an aura of imposing elegance. She wore a long, deep black dress that fit her body perfectly, covered by a thick, very expensive-looking coat. Her head was covered with a modern black turban-style scarf, and half of her face was hidden by large black sunglasses. The woman, Director Luna, approached with a slow but determined gait. She did not go directly to Mark, but stopped for a moment in front of a grave that was still a fresh mound of earth. That mound of earth, without a headstone or a name, was a common grave for the unidentified victims of the fire. Mark swallowed, feeling a chill. He knew very well whose grave that was, or at least who he thought was buried there. It was the place where social services had mass buried the bodies of the victims from the fire in the poor neighborhood, including his ex-wife Emily. Mark felt that fate was mocking him for this investor to stop precisely in front of Emily's grave. A cold sweat ran down his back. Despite the frigid afternoon air, Director Luna finally turned and faced Mark. As she approached, a luxurious and mysterious scent of lilies emanated from her, overpowering the smell of damp earth in the surroundings. Mark felt his breath catch for a moment. That scent reminded him of something vague from the past, but the luxury this woman exuded clouded his memories. Behind the black sunglasses, Emily observed keenly the man she once loved and served sincerely. She saw in Mark's eyes a mixture of fear and greed. She felt the urge to scream and slap that man, but she restrained herself with all her might. She was no longer the weeping Emily. She was the cold businesswoman, Director Luna. She extended a black leather-gloved hand for him to shake. When Mark took her hand, his eyes fixed on Director Luna's ring finger. There she wore a simple gold ring with a small, worn stone that didn't match the rest of her diamond jewelry. Mark's eyes widened. He knew that ring very well. It was his wedding ring with Emily, a cheap ring they bought when they had nothing, the ring he forced her to take off and threw in the trash when he kicked her out. How could that ring be on the finger of this multi-millionaire woman? Mark stammered. His face turned pale. He pointed at the ring with a trembling finger, his voice stuck in his throat. Emily noticed his reaction. She gave a meaningful but unreadable smile. She casually turned the ring on her finger as if it were just another accessory. In a flat, cold tone, Emily asked if there was a problem with her appearance. Her trained voice sounded deeper and more authoritative. different from Emily's soft, delicate voice. Mark tried to compose himself, cleared his throat awkwardly, and said the ring reminded him of someone who had passed away. Emily let out a small, dry, emotionless laugh. She replied that she had found the ring in an old antique shop and liked it for its unique shape and the value of its sad history. That answer silenced Mark, making him feel foolish for his strange thoughts. Of course, Mark thought, it was impossible for the poor Emily, now turned to ash, to have been resurrected as a tycoon. It was just a horrible coincidence. The business conversation began as a light drizzle started to fall. Emily didn't let Mark beat around the bush. She got straight to the point. She knew Mark's company needed $50 million to pay off a debt that was due next week. Mark was shocked that Director Luna knew the exact figure he had tried to hide in the financial reports. Emily said that Vanguard Consolidated was willing to invest double what he needed, $100 million, on the condition that Mark sign an exclusive investment contract with his personal assets as collateral. The offer was as tempting to the thirsty Mark as an oasis in the desert. Without thinking much about the risks, Mark immediately agreed. Greed clouded his reason. He didn't realize he had just agreed to walk into the lion's mouth. Director Luna ended the meeting abruptly. She didn't want to be near Mark for long due to the disgust he provoked in her. She handed Mark her personal secretary's business card and instructed him to go to the Vanguard Consolidated headquarters the next morning to sign the contract. Before getting back into her luxury car, Emily took one last look at the mound of red earth. In her mind, she said goodbye to the old Emily. From today, the weak Emily was truly dead and buried there. What remained was Director Luna, ready to slowly destroy Mark's life. The car drove away, leaving Mark alone in the increasingly dark cemetery. He smiled stupidly, imagining the $100 million that would soon be in his account, not realizing it was the money for his own business's funeral. The next day, Mark walked confidently into the Vanguard Consolidated skyscraper. He wore his best suit, his hair impeccably styled, and had put on an excessive amount of expensive cologne to hide his nervousness. The building was a symbol of the power and wealth he had so longed for. Marble floors, glass walls, and abstract paintings worth millions decorated the central lobby. Mark felt he belonged there, that he deserved to be part of the elite. A beautiful receptionist guided him to a meeting room on the top floor, where the Vanguard legal team and Director Luna were already waiting. The meeting room felt cold, not just because of the air conditioning, but because of the deliberately created tense atmosphere. Director Luna was seated at the end of a long table, with her back to a large window showing a panoramic view of the city. She was still wearing her sunglasses, which gave her a mysterious and distant air. In front of her was a rather thick stack of contract documents. Emily nodded briefly as Mark entered, without saying a word, letting the lawyer lead the conversation. The lawyer, an older man with a stern face, explained the contract clauses in a monotonous but rapid voice. Mark, his mind already on splurging the money and paying his debts, didn't pay much attention to the details. He only listened to the points that favored him. The $100 million injection, access to Vanguard's business network, and the opportunity for international expansion. When the documents were placed in front of him, Mark picked up the gold pen offered to him. His hand trembled slightly with excitement. The lawyer reminded him to read the clauses regarding the collateral and late payment penalties, but Mark, with arrogance, barely glanced at them. He was sure that with so much money, his company would recover soon, so he didn't have to worry about default. He didn't see a small clause printed in a slightly smaller font than the rest on the last page. The clause stated, "If the second party, Mark, fails to make the first installment payment exactly 1 month after the date of fund disbursement, the ownership of all company assets and registered personal property, including the residential house, vehicles, and land, will automatically be transferred to the first party, Vanguard Consolidated, without the need for a judicial process." It was the death trap, prepared with utmost care by Emily and Mrs. Vance. With a broad smile, Mark signed on the dotted line. The sound of the pen scratching sounded very loud in Emily's ears, like the sound of a death sentence handed down by the condemned man himself. Emily held her breath for a moment, and then slowly exhaled. The fish had taken the bait. Mark had just mortgaged his entire life, including the luxurious house where he lived with Tiffany, the same house he once built with sweat and tears alongside Emily, the same house from which Emily was forcibly expelled. Now that house was technically in Emily's hands. After the signing, Emily stood up and briefly shook Mark's hand. Her hand was as cold as ice. She said, "Congratulations," in a flat tone. Mark interpreted it as professionalism. In reality, it was a welcome to hell. While Mark was busy with contract matters, Tiffany was in her earthly paradise, the most luxurious shopping mall in the capital. Tiffany walked like a celebrity, surrounded by store employees carrying her shopping bags. Upon hearing that Mark was going to receive a large investment, Tiffany immediately lost her mind. She bought designer bags worth hundreds of thousands, limited edition high heels, and diamond jewelry. Tiffany felt like the queen of the world. She treated the store employees with disdain, scolding them if the service was slow or if they didn't have her size. She didn't know that all her credit card expenses were being monitored. Tiffany's credit cards had already maxed out, but Mark had asked the bank to temporarily increase the limit with the investment contract as collateral. In her office, Emily received real-time reports of Tiffany's purchase transactions on her tablet. She saw the huge figures Tiffany had spent in just a few hours. Emily smiled cynically. It was part of her plan. Mrs. Vance had had Vanguard's financial agents contact the boutiques and jewelers where Tiffany owed money. Emily had secretly bought up the invoices of Tiffany's personal debts in the murky world of business. Debt is the deadliest weapon of control. By buying those debts, Emily now directly controlled Tiffany's fate. If Tiffany didn't pay, Emily had the right to seize her assets or even press criminal charges. Tiffany, unaware that she was falling into a trap, continued to shop cheerfully. She even called her high society friends to invite them to a party that night to celebrate her husband's business success, bragging as if they had acquired a large company, when in reality, hers was practically mortgaged. Emily watched Tiffany's stupidity from a distance with a hint of pity. That woman truly had no brain, only worldly desires. Before, Emily often felt intimidated by Tiffany's beauty and wealth, but now she realized that Tiffany was nothing more than an empty plastic doll without any value. That afternoon, the first part of the investment was deposited into Mark's company account. Upon receiving the notification of the multi-million-dollar deposit, Mark shouted with joy in his office. He immediately transferred part of the money to pay off his accumulated online gambling debts, and another part to finance Tiffany's lifestyle. He ignored the important company items he needed to save, thinking he could juggle the remaining money later. Mark's carelessness and abysmal financial management were Emily's main weapon. She knew that with that mentality, in less than a month, the $100 million would have vanished without any result. And when the due date arrived, Mark wouldn't have a cent to pay the installment, and then Emily would come to claim everything. Tonight, Emily stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking into the distance toward the luxurious residential neighborhood. She imagined Mark and Tiffany laughing and partying on the suffering of others, celebrating a false victory with money that was actually the noose tightening around their necks. "Enjoy tonight, Mark, Tiffany," Emily whispered to the night breeze. "Eat well, sleep soundly, because starting tomorrow, your nightmare begins." Emily swirled her glass, her eyes shining with determination. Phase 1 of the plan had been a perfect success. Now it was time to move on to Phase 2, the psychological terror to shatter their minds before destroying them financially. The terror didn't begin with a big explosion, but with an eerie silence inside Mark's luxurious house. A week after signing the contract, Mark came home late at night, half drunk. He felt on top of the world, convinced he still had plenty of company money left and had everything under control. The large house was silent. The maids would already be asleep in their quarters, and Tiffany probably hadn't returned from some high society party yet. Mark stumbled up the stairs to the master bedroom. As he opened the door, a cold draft brushed his neck. He clearly remembered turning off the air conditioning before leaving that morning. Mark fumbled for the light switch, but it didn't turn on. He grumbled in annoyance, suspecting a short circuit. With the help of the moonlight coming through the window, he walked toward the bed. His steps stopped dead. In the middle of his pillow was a small, neatly placed wooden box. Mark's heart beat irregularly. Who had dared to enter his bedroom and leave that there? The box looked old and antique, made of faded teak wood. Overcoming his fear with curiosity, Mark approached cautiously. He opened the box slowly. A pungent smell of rotten fish instantly assaulted his nose, making him nauseous. Inside the box was an old wooden bracelet with a broken string, soaked in a red, sticky liquid that looked like blood. Mark recognized the bracelet. It was Emily's cherished bracelet, a keepsake from her mother that she always kept. Mark clearly remembered snatching the bracelet from her the night he threw her out and throwing it in the trash in front of the house, because the sound it made when Emily fidgeted with it while he was watching TV annoyed him. Mark took several steps back. His legs hit the nightstand, causing the vase on it to fall and shatter. His breathing quickened. How could a bracelet thrown in the trash months ago reappear here on his bed in such a ghastly state? The red liquid still looked wet, as if it had just been poured. Mark's mind immediately went to the fire. Was this a message from beyond the grave? Was Emily's vengeful spirit roaming to get revenge? Mark ran to the bathroom and washed his face over and over, hoping it was a drunken hallucination. But when he returned to the bedroom, the box was still there, looking at him silently. Fear began to consume Mark's mind. He felt watched by 1,000 invisible eyes in every dark corner of the bedroom. The next day, the terror intensified. While driving to his office, his car's state-of-the-art sound system suddenly turned on by itself. It wasn't a song, but a recorded voice with interference, yet clear. A woman's voice, sobbing. It was Emily's voice. "Mark, don't throw me out, please. I'm scared." The phrase repeated like a broken record. Panicking, Mark pushed every button on the dashboard to turn it off, but the voice grew louder and louder, filling the car as if Emily were sitting in the back seat. Mark screamed hysterically at the voice to shut up. His car swerved, nearly crashing into the highway median. When Mark slammed on the brakes on the shoulder, the voice suddenly stopped, leaving a silence more terrifying than the sobs. At the office, Mark was a wreck. He couldn't concentrate on work. He jumped every time the phone rang. Every time his office door opened, he thought he would see Emily with a burned face. The employees started whispering about their boss's strange behavior. Mark often talked to himself. He would get angry for no reason, and his face was always pale and sweaty. The business, which should have started to recover with Director Luna's investment, was even more neglected. Mark's decisions became irrational. He fired his secretary just because she wore a lily-scented perfume, similar to Emily's. He became paranoid, suspecting everyone around him was conspiring to bring him down. Tiffany, seeing her husband's drastic change, was irritated and ashamed. She thought Mark was weak and drank too much. When Mark tried to tell her about the bloody bracelet and the recorded voice, Tiffany scoffed. She accused him of having hallucinations due to unnecessary guilt. "That woman is dead, Mark. She's ash. Stop acting like a coward." Tiffany yelled at him one night when Mark refused to sleep in the bedroom out of fear. Tiffany didn't know that all the terror was very real and meticulously planned by Mrs. Vance's operations team. Mrs. Vance's men had infiltrated the house and hacked Mark's car system with cutting-edge technology. Emily watched Mark's mental collapse through the monitor screens in her luxurious apartment. Seeing Mark, once so arrogant, now trembling with fear like a cornered rat, gave her a certain satisfaction. But this was just the beginning. The ghosts of the past would not stop haunting Mark until he completely lost his mind. While Mark was busy fighting the ghosts he had created himself, Tiffany was facing another storm. Her out-of-control luxury lifestyle was starting to take its toll. The cash Mark had given her vanished without a trace into luxury items she hadn't even used once. Tiffany ran up debts at her favorite boutiques, recklessly swiping her credit card again, trusting in her status as a CEO's wife. But she didn't realize that the web director Luna had woven was already starting to tighten around her neck. That morning, while Tiffany was getting a facial at a salon frequented by high society, 2 burly men in black suits entered the salon. They were not customers, but professional debt collectors hired by the finance company owned by Vanguard Consolidated, where all of Tiffany's bills were now consolidated. The collectors approached Tiffany without hesitation, who had a facial mask on. In a loud voice, so that all the salon's clients could hear, they demanded payment of a $2 million debt that was due that very day. Tiffany jumped up, furious at the humiliation. She screamed at the men, telling them her husband was rich, with a multi-million-dollar investment, and would certainly pay. But the men calmly showed her an asset seizure order. They told her that Mark's credit cards and accounts had been temporarily frozen due to indications of non-payment of the company's first installment. Tiffany turned pale. She tried to call Mark, but her husband's phone was off. Amid the panic, her high society friends who were there began to whisper and look at her with contempt, the same look Tiffany used to give to the poor. Kicked out of the salon for causing a scene, Tiffany returned home in an explosive rage, only to find Mark sitting in a corner of the room with a vacant stare and a bottle of liquor in his hand. Tiffany exploded, blaming Mark for not managing the money well and for letting the debt collectors humiliate her. Mark, already mentally unstable from days of terror, fought back. He blamed her for all his misfortune. "It's because of your spending. It's your fault I'm like this. You incited me to hate Emily." A violent fight broke out. Valuables flew across the room, shattering. In a fit of anger, Mark unintentionally blurted out that he regretted burning Emily's house if he was going to end up haunted by ghosts. Tiffany fell silent upon hearing that confession. She knew Mark was evil, but she never imagined her husband was actually an arsonist. The couple's domestic problems and debts spread quickly among the capital's elite. That night, a prestigious charity event was held, attended by top CEOs. Tiffany, clinging to her last shred of pride, decided to attend. She wanted to prove she was still someone important. She put on her best dress and the diamond jewelry she hadn't paid for yet, but the atmosphere at the party was cold to her. People moved away as she passed, as if poverty were a contagious disease. Among the crowd, Tiffany saw the figure who was capturing all the attention that night, Director Luna. The mysterious woman stood elegantly, surrounded by tycoons lining up to speak with her. Director Luna wore a striking maroon dress and exuded an undeniable aura of power. Desperate, Tiffany tried to approach Director Luna, hoping to ask for a loan or help, since her husband was her business partner. As Tiffany approached, Director Luna turned slowly. In her hand, she held a glass of deep red pomegranate juice. Tiffany began to complain, telling her problems with a pitiful and feigned attitude, seeking compassion. Director Luna listened impassively behind her elegant black sunglasses. When Tiffany finished speaking, Director Luna gave a faint smile, a smile that chilled Tiffany's blood. "What a pity, Mrs. Hayes. I don't do business with defaulters," Director Luna said in a frosty voice. Suddenly, several security guards from the event approached. It turned out that the boutique to which she owed for the jewelry she was wearing had reported her for misappropriation of unpaid merchandise. In front of hundreds of guests, the police confiscated the diamond necklace and bracelet Tiffany was wearing. Tiffany screamed and struggled hysterically as the police held her by the arms. She was completely humiliated, stripped of all her false luxury. As she was being dragged away and past Director Luna, the latter took a step forward, momentarily lowered her sunglasses, and looked directly into Tiffany's eyes. Those eyes, Tiffany recognized them. The same clouded but sharp eyes she despised when Emily used to bring Mark lunch at his office. Director Luna brought her lips to Tiffany's ear and whispered softly but very clearly, "You once took my husband from me when I had nothing, and you called me trash. Now enjoy being the real trash, Tiffany." Tiffany's body went rigid. Her eyes widened as if they were going to pop out of their sockets. She recognized that voice. "Emily, you're alive?" Tiffany screamed hysterically, but no one believed her. Everyone thought she had gone mad from the pressure of her debts. Tiffany was dragged out of the building, screaming Emily's name nonstop. Meanwhile, Director Luna put her sunglasses back on, calmly sipped her pomegranate juice, and resumed her conversation with the guests as if nothing had happened. That night, Tiffany not only went broke, but she also lost her mind over a truth she couldn't accept. The day of judgment finally arrived. Just as the sun embraced the city from the highest point in the sky, exactly 1 month after the investment disbursement, the deadline for Mark's first installment payment to Vanguard Consolidated was due. Mark sat in the large chair in his office, which now felt like a glass cage. The phone on his desk rang non-stop, a clamor that announced the collapse of his kingdom. Mark didn't dare to answer. He knew who was calling: the Vanguard legal team. Mark's company account was empty. The 100 million he had boasted about had vanished without a trace, consumed by his lifestyle, gambling, and the stupid business decisions he made in his state of panic. Mark tried to access his personal account from his laptop, but the screen only showed the words in red: access frozen. Suddenly, the door to Mark's office was forced open from the outside. A group of men in security uniforms with the Vanguard logo entered without warning, followed by the legal team with a stack of seizure papers. Mark stood up, trying to cling to the last shred of his crumbling dignity. He yelled at them to leave, that it was his office. But the head of the legal team calmly placed a paper on Mark's desk. It was the deed of transfer of ownership. According to the contract Mark had signed without reading carefully, failure to pay the first installment meant he voluntarily ceded all his company's assets and personal property to the investor. At that very moment, this building, the chair he was sitting on, even the car parked downstairs, were no longer his. Mark had become homeless inside his own palace. The security guards dragged him out of the building in front of all his employees, who watched with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Mark struggled and shouted that he knew the owner of Vanguard, shouting Mrs. Vance's name, convinced that if he pleaded directly with the old woman, she would forgive him. With the few dollars left in his pocket, Mark recklessly took a taxi and headed to the Vanguard headquarters. His mind was in chaos. He felt it all must be a misunderstanding. Arriving at the imposing skyscraper, Mark ran to the reception, disheveled, his shirt untucked and his tie askew. Strangely, the receptionist didn't stop him. As if expecting his arrival, they immediately guided him to the top floor, to the main CEO's boardroom. Mark entered, panting, into the spacious and silent boardroom. The room was dark. Only a spotlight illuminated the large chair at the end of the long table. The chair was turned with its back to the door, so Mark could only see its high backrest. Mark immediately knelt on the cold floor, tears streaming down his face. Thinking the figure seated in the chair was Mrs. Vance, he began to beg for forgiveness. He promised to do anything, even become her slave, as long as his assets were not seized, and he didn't go to jail. He sobbed, talking about how unfortunate his fate was, how he had been deceived by circumstances, completely unaware of his own fault. A small laugh was heard from behind the chair. It was not the old, raspy laugh of an old woman, but the fresh yet sharp laugh of a young woman. The CEO's chair slowly swiveled to face Mark. Mark looked up, and at that moment, the air got stuck in his throat. His eyes bulged out of their sockets. The figure sitting there was not an old woman. It was a young and very beautiful woman, with a shining golden silk scarf framing her face. This time, there were no sunglasses hiding her face. Mark knew every part of that face. The nose, the lips, the eyes, the face he once kissed, the face he once screamed at, the face he believed had turned to ash in the fire. "Hello, Mark. Do you still remember the unfortunate wife you abandoned?" The woman greeted him with a soft but lethal voice. Emily sat elegantly, looking down at Mark, who was paralyzed on the floor as if he had seen a ghost. Mark's brain short-circuited. He couldn't process the reality before him. Emily was alive. Emily was Director Luna. Emily was the person who had been controlling his life all this time. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place instantly. The ghostly terror, the bloody bracelet, the contract trap. It had all been a script, orchestrated by the woman he once considered weak and stupid. Mark tried to get up, but his legs trembled violently. He pointed at Emily with a shaky hand, his mouth open but emitting no sound. Emily rose from the chair and slowly approached Mark. The sound of her heels echoed in the silent room, each step like the ticking of a death clock for Mark. Emily stood over Mark, who was still on his knees. She looked at her ex-husband with a cold gaze, without a trace of love. Emily said she was not seeking revenge. She was just giving back what he had given her. He gave her pain, so he received pain. He gave her poverty, so he received poverty. He tried to kill, so he must be prepared to die. Legally, Emily informed Mark that the game was over. His assets were now officially Emily's property under the patronage of Vanguard: the house, the car, the land, everything. Mark had nothing left in this world except the clothes he was wearing. Consumed by desperation and anger, Mark suddenly lunged to strangle Emily. But before his hands could touch the edge of Emily's scarf, 2 personal bodyguards who were hiding in the shadows of the room pounced on Mark and threw him to the floor. Mark's face was crushed against the carpet. He groaned in pain. Emily didn't flinch, she simply watched him with indifference. She pressed the intercom button on the conference table and called for the next guest. The room door swung open, and several uniformed police officers with handcuffs entered. Emily smiled faintly at the struggling Mark. "Enjoy the rest of your life in prison, dear. It's a fair price for someone who tried to burn his wife alive." Mark was led out of the Vanguard building in handcuffs in front of dozens of journalists whom Emily's PR team had already invited. The camera flashes blinded Mark, documenting the moment of his fall to be broadcast across the country. At the police station, Mark could no longer deny it. Emily presented as evidence a CCTV recording filmed by Mrs. Vance's security team's hidden cameras, which clearly showed the moment Mark's men sprayed gasoline and set Emily's house on fire. Proof of the money transfer Mark paid to those thugs was also traced. With such overwhelming evidence, coupled with several charges of financial fraud and tax evasion discovered in the audit of Mark's company, the evil ex-husband's fate was sealed. The trial was swift. The judge struck the gavel firmly. Life in prison for attempted murder and serious corporate crimes. Mark fainted in the courtroom upon hearing the sentence. Meanwhile, Emily, sitting in the front row of the visitors' gallery, gave thanks in her heart. She felt no excessive joy, only immense relief. Justice had finally been served. There were no more shadows of fear to torment her. The dark chapter of her life had been firmly closed with the lock of justice. On the other hand, karma also acted ironically with Tiffany. After going bankrupt and being evicted from the luxurious house seized by Emily, Tiffany had nowhere to go. Her high society friends blocked her number, and no one wanted to take in a debt-ridden woman. Her parents in her hometown also rejected her, ashamed of the rumors that had spread. Tiffany, who once despised menial work, now lived on the streets. With no education, no skills, and a criminal record for misappropriation of luxury goods, no company would hire her. Finally, to survive, Tiffany got a job as a dishwasher in a dirty roadside diner, exactly the same kind of job Emily used to do. Every night, Tiffany's hands, which once only touched luxury items, were now blistered from cheap detergent and dirty water. The diner owner often scolded her for being slow. One night, while cleaning a table, Tiffany saw the diner's television broadcast. On the screen was the elegant figure of Emily, being interviewed as the most inspiring businesswoman of the year. Emily shone as she spoke of her new social contribution program. Tiffany looked at the screen with tears in her eyes, lamenting her fate. She realized she had thrown away a diamond for a handful of pebbles. Regret came too late and stabbed her heart painfully every time she saw the success of the woman she once trampled on. Months later, Emily returned to the place where it all began, under the bridge. But this time, the place was completely transformed. With her fortune, Emily didn't buy a private island or a jet. She used the money to redevelop the poor neighborhood under the bridge. She built the Eleanor Vance home, a clean, habitable, and humane temporary housing complex for the homeless. The once gloomy concrete walls were now painted with colorful murals. There was a community kitchen that offered free, nutritious meals every day, a free medical clinic, and a training space to teach residents skills and help them become self-sufficient. That afternoon, Emily walked through the small park of the shelter with the real Mrs. Vance. The old woman smiled with pride as she looked at her adopted granddaughter. Emily had not become a monster after gaining power. On the contrary, she had become the protector of the weak, just as she once protected Annie. They sat on a park bench. Seeing the street children, who could now learn to read and laugh freely, Emily felt her heart fill. She realized that the harsh trials she had endured, the divorce, poverty, and even the murder attempt, were God's way of forging her to be where she was now, becoming God's hand to help others. Her revenge was over, but her work of good had just begun. The story ends with a heartbreaking but satisfying scene of contrast. In a narrow, damp cell, Mark is huddled in a corner. His head is shaved, his face gaunt and pale. In his hands, he holds a plastic plate with hard rice and spoiled side dishes, exactly like the scraps Emily used to eat to survive. Mark stares at the food with a vacant look. In the prison corridor, a small television broadcasts the news of the inauguration of the Eleanor Vance home. Mark sees on the screen Emily's face, smiling happily, surrounded by officials and people who love her. Mark tries to bring the spoiled rice to his mouth, but a sob blocks his throat. He cries, beating his chest with endless regret.